She thought she ruled Chicago's underworld beside her husband, until a single photograph revealed the truth. Victor Blackwood, the city's most feared mafia boss, wasn't just unfaithful. He'd built an entire second empire behind her back, complete with a pregnant mistress and a hidden fortune stolen from their shared throne. But Luciana Castellano wasn't just any betrayed wife. She was the daughter of legends, bred for power and vengeance. What Victor didn't know was that the empire he thought he controlled had always belonged to her bloodline, and she was about to take it all back. If you're ready to witness the most ruthless takedown in Chicago's criminal history, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Luciana's revenge travels across the world. The study smelled like expensive whiskey and old leather, the same scent that had always meant safety to Luciana Castellano Blackwood. Tonight, it smelled like a tomb. She stood perfectly still in the darkness, her silk robe clinging to her frame as the glow from her phone screen illuminated her face. The image on the screen hadn't changed in the 15 minutes she'd been staring at it, though she kept hoping it would. That somehow her eyes had deceived her, that the pixels would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They didn't. The photograph was crystal clear. Victor, her Victor, stood in what appeared to be a nursery, his tattooed hands spread protectively across the swollen belly of a woman Luciana had never seen before. The woman was young, maybe 25, with cascading auburn hair and a smile that spoke of promises and futures. She wore a diamond necklace that Luciana recognized immediately. It was from Cartier, from the same collection Victor had claimed was sold out when she'd admired it 6 months ago. The message that accompanied the photo contained no words, just a location pin and a date stamp from 3 days ago. Luciana's hand trembled as she set the phone down on Victor's mahogany desk, the same desk where they'd made love countless times, where they'd planned their ascension through Chicago's criminal hierarchy, where he'd sworn on his mother's grave that she would always be his queen. 4 years. 4 years of marriage, of building an empire together, of standing beside him as he consolidated power across the city's underworld. 4 years of being the perfect mafia wife, elegant at charity galas, ruthless in business meetings, silent when silence was required, and deadly when action was necessary. All of it, apparently, had meant nothing. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the penthouse. Luciana's spine straightened automatically, years of training kicking in before conscious thought could catch up. She heard Victor's footsteps in the foyer, heard him speaking to Marcus, his head of security. Their voices were casual, relaxed, the sound of a man who had no idea his world was about to burn. "Tell Dimitri we'll handle the shipment on Friday," Victor was saying, "and make sure the police commissioner gets his envelope before the weekend. We don't need him getting nervous." Luciana moved to the window, staring out at the Chicago skyline. The city glittered beneath her, a kingdom of glass and steel and blood. She'd been born into this world. The Castellano family had run the South Side for 3 generations before her father was murdered in a power play that left her mother broken and her legacy in shambles. Victor had been her salvation then, a rising boss who'd avenged her father's death and claimed her as his bride in the same brutal month. She thought it was love. Now she wondered if it had just been strategy. The study door opened. Luciana didn't turn around. "Lucy?" Victor's voice was warm, affectionate. She could hear the smile in it. "What are you doing up? It's almost 2 in the morning." "Couldn't sleep," she said softly, keeping her voice steady. In the window's reflection, she watched him approach. Victor Blackwood was 42 years old and looked like violence personified. 6 feet 3 inches of muscle and menace, with sharp Slavic features inherited from his Russian mother, and cold blue eyes that had watched men die without flinching. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples now, giving him a distinguished air that only added to his power. He was beautiful and terrible, and she'd loved him with every fiber of her being. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her against his chest. The gesture was familiar, intimate. Once, it would have made her feel safe. Tonight, it made her want to scream. "Bad dreams?" he murmured against her hair. "Something like that." His hands moved gently across her stomach, and Luciana's breath caught. That same gesture in that photograph on another woman's pregnant belly. She closed her eyes, fighting the nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. "You're tense," Victor observed, his fingers kneading the muscles of her shoulders. The business with the Italians stressing you out? She could do it now, could turn around, show him the photograph, demand answers, could scream and cry and fall apart like any normal woman would when her husband's infidelity was revealed in such brutal clarity. But Luciana Castellano had never been normal, and the Castellano blood in her veins demanded something far more satisfying than tears. Just tired, she said instead, allowing herself to lean back into his embrace. Long day. Victor kissed her temple. Come to bed. I'll help you relax. The offer, which once would have filled her with desire, now made her skin crawl. But Luciana was her father's daughter, trained from childhood to hide every emotion, to play every angle, to never reveal her hand until the perfect moment to strike. In a minute, she promised. I just need to finish some emails. Work can wait until morning. His hand slid lower, more insistent now. I missed you today. Did you? She wanted to ask. Or did you miss her? The auburn-haired girl carrying your child. Victor, she said gently, turning in his arms to face him. Her hands came up to cup his face, and she smiled. The same smile she'd perfected over years of playing the devoted wife. I love you. You know that, right? Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at the sudden declaration? Or maybe guilt. But it vanished quickly, replaced by that confident smirk that had once made her heart race. Of course I know that, he said, kissing her forehead. And I love you, princess. You're my queen. Always have been, always will be. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that Luciana almost believed he believed it himself. Good, she whispered, because I would hate to think you'd ever betray that. She felt him stiffen slightly, just for a heartbeat, before he relaxed again. Never, he said firmly. You and me, Lucy. We're forever. Nothing changes that. She kissed him then, pouring every ounce of false devotion into it, and felt him respond immediately. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark with want. Go to bed, she told him softly. I'll be there soon. I promise. Victor hesitated, then nodded. Don't be too long. She watched him leave, waited until she heard the bedroom door close, then returned to the desk. Her phone sat where she'd left it, the photograph still glowing on the screen. But now, instead of devastation, Luciana felt something else entirely. Cold, calculated fury. She opened her contacts, scrolling to a name she hadn't called in over a year. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. Luciana Castellano. Now that's a name I didn't expect to see tonight. Hello, Uncle Marco, she said quietly. Marco De Luca wasn't actually her uncle. He'd been her father's consigliere, the man who'd taught her everything about the business before her father's death. After her marriage to Victor, she'd had to distance herself from her father's old allies. Victor had insisted on building his own power base, free from the ghosts of the past. Now she was grateful for those ghosts. It's late for social calls, sweetheart, Marco said. What do you need? Information, Luciana replied. Complete discretion, and possibly a favor that could get you killed. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Your father's daughter through and through. Tell me what you need. She did. She told him about the photograph, about the location pin, about the suspicions that had been building in her mind for months, the unexplained absences, the mysterious withdrawals from their accounts, the way Victor's attention had seemed divided lately. Marco listened without interrupting, and when she finished, his voice was grave. How deep do you want me to dig? All the way to the bottom, Luciana said. Everything. Where she lives, how long it's been going on, how much money he's spent on her. I want bank records, property deeds, text messages, phone calls. Everything. That's going to take time. And if Victor finds out, he won't, she cut him off. Because you're too good at your job to get caught. And Marco, when you're done digging, I'm going to need something else. Name it. Luciana's reflection stared back at her from the darkened window, and she barely recognized the woman looking back. Her eyes had gone cold, calculating. This was the face her father must have worn when he made the hard decisions, when he chose strategy over emotion. I'm going to need evidence that will hold up with the syndicate council, she said softly. The kind of evidence that proves Victor Blackwood has been stealing from the family, making unauthorized deals, and jeopardizing everything we've built. Marco was quiet for a long moment. Luciana, what you're talking about, that's not just divorce. That's a coup. I know exactly what it is. The council won't take kindly to a wife going against her husband. They're old school, traditional. They'll say, you should forgive him, stand by your man, all that bullshit. They'll change their tune, Luciana said, her voice hard as diamonds. When I remind them that the Castellano family controlled Chicago's South Side for 30 years before Victor Blackwood was even born. When I show them that the connections, the infrastructure, the loyalty, all of it came from my bloodline, not his. He married into power, Uncle Marco. I was born into it. She could hear the smile in Marco's voice when he replied, Giuseppe would be proud of you right now. Your father always said you had the coldest blood he'd ever seen. Then let's put it to good use, Luciana said. How long will you need? Give me a week, maybe 2 if he's been really careful. You have 72 hours. Marco laughed outright. Demanding, just like your old man. Fine. 72 hours. But Luciana? Be careful. Victor's not a man who handles betrayal well. Neither am I, she replied, and ended the call. The next 3 days were the most difficult of Luciana's life. She had to act normal, had to smile and laugh, and play the role of the devoted wife, while her insides churned with rage and betrayal. She went to dinners with Victor's associates, planned a charity gala for the upcoming month, made love to her husband with practiced enthusiasm while imagining his downfall. Victor noticed nothing. Why would he? She'd been playing this role for 4 years, perfecting every gesture, every word. He had no idea that the woman sleeping beside him was the same one systematically planning his destruction. On the second day, she began her own quiet investigation. While Victor was at a meeting with the distribution managers, Luciana accessed the hidden safe in his study, the one he thought she didn't know about. Inside, she found what she was looking for. A second phone, one she'd never seen before. Her hand shook as she powered it on. The device wasn't password protected, Victor's arrogance assuming no one would ever find it. The text messages loaded, and Luciana had to grip the edge of the desk to steady herself. Months of messages, hundreds of them. Declarations of love, promises of a future together, discussions about baby names and nursery colors. The woman's name was Isabella. She was 26 years old, worked as a consultant, which Luciana knew was code for high-end escort, and apparently believed that Victor was going to leave his wife for her. Soon, my love, one of Victor's messages read. Once the baby comes, everything will be different. I'll make sure you and our son have everything you deserve. Luciana's vision blurred. Our son. He was going to have a son with this woman, while she, his actual wife, remained childless because Victor had insisted they wait until the business was more stable. Another lie. Just one more in a tower of lies that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. She photographed every message, backed up the data to a cloud account Victor couldn't access, then carefully replaced the phone exactly as she'd found it. Her hands were steady now, her mind clear. The shock and pain had crystallized into something pure and focused. Purpose. That evening, Victor came home with flowers, expensive roses from the boutique downtown. He presented them with a flourish, kissing her deeply in the foyer, while Marcus and the other guards pretended not to notice. What's the occasion? Luciana asked, accepting the bouquet with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Does a man need an occasion to buy his beautiful wife flowers? Victor countered, pulling her close. I just wanted to remind you how much you mean to me. Guilt, Luciana realized. He was feeling guilty about something, probably spending the afternoon with Isabella, planning their future while his pregnant mistress glowed with the promise of his son. You're too good to me, she murmured, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. Soon, she promised herself, soon that heart would know the fear and betrayal she felt now. Impossible, Victor said, tilting her chin up to look at him. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Lucy. I hope you know that. She wondered if he practiced these lies, if he rehearsed them in the mirror before coming home. How did he keep them all straight? The promises to her. The promises to Isabella. The image he projected to the world. Show me, she whispered, and led him to the bedroom. Afterward, as Victor slept beside her, Luciana stared at the ceiling and thought about her father. Giuseppe Castellano had been a hard man, ruthless in business and unforgiving of betrayal, but he'd loved her mother with a fierce devotion that was legendary in their circles. When Elena Castellano died of cancer, Giuseppe had mourned her for exactly 1 year, then returned to business with renewed focus, channeling his grief into building his empire. Never let them see you weak, he told Luciana when she was 15, teaching her to shoot in the basement range of their estate. Emotion is a weapon, princess. You can use it, but never let it use you. The moment you let feelings control your decisions, you've already lost. She tried to apply that lesson to her marriage, tried to be the perfect balance of loving wife and ruthless partner. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd actually fallen in love with Victor Blackwood. She'd let her guard down, trusted him completely, believed in the future they were building together. That ended tonight. On the third day, Marco called. "I've got what you need," he said without preamble. "And Luciana, it's worse than you thought." They met at a coffee shop in Evanston, far enough from Victor's usual territory to avoid his network of informants. Marco slid a thick manila envelope across the table, his weathered face grim. "The woman's name is Isabella Moretti," he began. "Victor's been seeing her for 18 months. He set her up in a townhouse in Lincoln Park, paid for it in cash, but I traced the money back to accounts he's been skimming from the organization's restaurants and clubs." Luciana's jaw tightened. "How much? 3 million, give or take? Maybe more if we dig deeper. He's been moving money through shell corporations, hiding it from the books. The townhouse, the car he bought her, medical expenses for the pregnancy, setting up trust funds. It all adds up." "The council doesn't know?" Marco shook his head. "He's been careful. The amounts were small enough individually that they didn't trigger any flags, but when you add them all together over 18 months, he tapped the envelope. That's embezzlement. That's stealing from the family. What else? He's been making side deals without authorization. Remember that shipment from Colombia last month? The one Victor said fell through? I remember. It didn't fall through. He rerouted it through a separate distributor, kept the profits off the books. There's also evidence he's been selling protection to businesses in territories we agreed were neutral ground. The Italians are pissed, by the way. They just don't know it's Victor behind it yet. Luciana absorbed this information, her mind already working through the implications. What about the baby? Due in 6 weeks. It's a boy, like you thought. Victor's already got a nursery set up at the townhouse. Top of the line everything. Isabella thinks he's going to leave you after the birth. Is he? Marco's expression was sympathetic. The messages suggest he's been stringing her along. Lots of promises about soon and when the time is right, but nothing concrete. My read? He wants to keep you both. You for the political connections and family legacy, her for whatever it is men like him think they're getting from their mistresses. Control, Luciana said softly. The illusion that he can have everything he wants without consequences. Probably. Marco leaned back in his chair. So what's your play? Luciana opened the envelope, scanning the documents inside. Bank statements, property records, photographs of Victor and Isabella together, transcripts of phone conversations. It was damning, comprehensive, exactly what she needed. I'm going to give him a choice, she said finally. The empire or the girl. Let's see what he values more. And if he chooses wrong? She looked up at her father's old friend, and Marco actually flinched at the ice in her eyes. Then I'm going to take everything from him, starting with the empire he thinks he built. That night, Luciana set her plan in motion. She began with the money, quietly moving assets, securing control of businesses that were technically in her name but had been managed by Victor. She reached out to old family contacts, people who'd been loyal to the Castellanos before Victor arrived, reminding them of old debts and older allegiances. She was careful, methodical, moving pieces on the chessboard with the patience her father had taught her. Victor noticed nothing because she gave him nothing to notice. She was still the perfect wife, attentive, supportive, elegant at his side during business meetings. But in the shadows, in the spaces between Victor's attention, Luciana Castellano was building her own army. 2 weeks later, she was ready. She chose a Friday evening, knowing Victor had a meeting scheduled with his captains. Luciana prepared dinner herself, osso buco, Victor's favorite, with a bottle of Barolo that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She set the table in the formal dining room, lit candles, wore the burgundy dress he loved. When Victor arrived home, he found her waiting with a smile. What's all this? He asked, genuine pleasure in his voice. Special occasion? Just wanted to do something nice for my husband, Luciana replied, kissing him softly. We've both been so busy lately. I thought we deserved a quiet evening together. Victor's eyes softened. You're amazing, you know that. They ate slowly, talking about business and politics and nothing of consequence. Luciana laughed at his jokes, touched his hand across the table, played the role she'd perfected over 4 years of marriage. And when they'd finished the meal, when Victor was relaxed and content, she reached into her purse and withdrew her phone. There's something I need to show you, she said calmly, and placed the device on the table between them. The photograph filled the screen. Victor's hands on Isabella's pregnant belly, his face radiating joy that Luciana had never seen him direct at her. The color drained from Victor's face. For a long moment he just stared at the image, his mouth opening and closing silently. Then his eyes snapped up to meet hers, and she saw panic there, raw and undisguised. Lucy, I can explain. Can you? She swiped to the next image. Victor and Isabella at a restaurant. Swipe. Victor and Isabella shopping for baby furniture. Swipe. Victor kissing Isabella outside the Lincoln Park townhouse. Please explain. I'm fascinated to hear how this happened. Victor's hands clenched into fists on the table. How did you get these? Wrong question, Luciana said softly. The right question is, how long did you think you could get away with this? He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. It's not what you think. Really? She remained seated, her voice deadly calm. Because I think you've been keeping a mistress for 18 months. I think you've been stealing from our organization to fund your little love nest. I think you got her pregnant and have been preparing to play father to her son while I, your actual wife, wait at home like a fool. Lucy, please, I'm not finished. She stood now, her movements graceful and controlled. I think you've been making unauthorized deals, skimming profits, and jeopardizing everything we've built for the sake of a 26-year-old girl who thinks you're going to leave me for her. Victor's expression shifted, hardening. You've been investigating me. Obviously. Who helped you? Marco? That old bastard never liked me. It doesn't matter who helped me, Luciana cut him off. What matters is what happens next. She moved to the window, looking out at the city they'd conquered together. I've thought about this very carefully, Victor. I've considered all my options, and I've decided to be generous. Generous, he repeated flatly. I'm going to give you a choice. She turned to face him, and her expression was serene, the calm before the storm. You can have the empire, or you can have her, but you can't have both. You can't be serious. I'm absolutely serious. Luciana's voice was soft but implacable. Either you end it with Isabella immediately, pay her off, send her away, make sure she and that baby disappear from your life forever, or I take this evidence to the syndicate council and let them decide what should happen to a boss who steals from the family and makes unauthorized deals. Victor stared at her, and she could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to find the angle that would let him keep everything. You wouldn't do that, he said finally. Going to the council would destroy us both. You'd lose everything too. Would I? Luciana tilted her head, studying him like a specimen under glass. I'm a Castellano, Victor. My family built half this city's criminal infrastructure before you were even born. The council members? Most of them knew my father, respected him. Some of them owe their positions to Castellano's support. You think they'll side with you over me when I show them proof that you've been robbing the family blind? She watched the reality of the situation dawn on him, watched him realize that he'd underestimated her completely. You have 24 hours, Luciana continued. Either Isabella disappears or you do. Choose wisely. Victor's hands were shaking with rage now. This is blackmail. This is justice, she corrected. You betrayed me, betrayed our marriage, betrayed the organization. I'm offering you a chance to fix one of those mistakes. Take it or don't. But tomorrow night, I want proof that Isabella Moretti is gone from Chicago, or I'm calling an emergency council meeting. She moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Victor? If you're thinking about doing something stupid, hurting me, having me killed, anything like that, know that I've made arrangements. Everything I have on you is backed up in multiple locations. If anything happens to me, it all goes to the council automatically. Lucy, you should have thought about the consequences before you put your hands on another woman, she said quietly. 24 hours. Don't disappoint me. She walked out of the dining room, out of the penthouse, and into the night. Her hands didn't start shaking until she was safely in her car, 3 blocks away. Then, and only then, did Luciana Castellano allow herself to feel the weight of what she'd just done. But she didn't cry. Castellanos didn't cry. They got even. The next 24 hours passed in agonizing slowness. Luciana stayed at a hotel downtown surrounded by security she'd hired personally, men loyal to the Castellano name rather than Victor Blackwood. She didn't sleep, couldn't eat, just waited for Victor's response. It came at 11:47 p.m., 11 minutes before her deadline. A text message with a single photograph attached. Isabella Moretti standing in what appeared to be an airport terminal, a boarding pass in her hand. The destination, Melbourne, Australia. A second text followed. Wire transfer of $2 million to an account in her name. She's gone. We'll never see her again. Luciana stared at the image for a long time. Isabella looked sad but resigned, one hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. Somewhere in that photo was Victor's son, the child he'd chosen to abandon in order to keep his empire. She should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, she felt nothing at all. "It's done," she texted back. "I'll be home tomorrow." But she had no intention of going home. Because the truth was, Luciana had lied to Victor. She'd never planned to forgive him, never intended to let him keep the empire he'd built on her family's legacy. The ultimatum, the choice, Isabella's exile, all of it was just the first move in a much longer game. Victor had chosen power over love, the empire over his unborn son. And in doing so, he'd revealed exactly who he was. A man who would sacrifice anything, betray anyone, to maintain control. Now Luciana knew exactly what she was dealing with. And more importantly, she knew that Victor had no such loyalty to family, no line he wouldn't cross if his throne was threatened, which meant she couldn't afford to leave him in power. Not when he'd proven he would destroy anything that stood in his way, even his own blood. 2 days later, Luciana returned to the penthouse. Victor was waiting, and the relief on his face when he saw her almost looked genuine. "Lucy," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. "I'm so sorry. I was stupid, reckless. It meant nothing. She meant nothing. You're the only one I love, the only one who matters." She let him hold her, let him stroke her hair and whisper apologies. And when he pulled back to look at her face, she gave him what he wanted, forgiveness. "I know," she said softly. "I know you love me. We'll get through this." Victor's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me another chance. I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you." "I know you will," Luciana replied and kissed him gently. That night, in the darkness of their bedroom, with Victor sleeping peacefully beside her, Luciana made her final decision. She'd given him mercy once, had offered him a way out, a chance to salvage their marriage if he'd only chosen differently. But Victor Blackwood had chosen power, had sent his pregnant girlfriend to the other side of the world without a second thought, all to maintain his grip on the empire. If power was what he valued above all else, then power was what Luciana would take from him. Not quickly, not obviously, but slowly, methodically, the way her father had taught her to dismantle an enemy, piece by piece, until nothing remained but dust and regret. She reached for her phone in the darkness, opening an encrypted message to Marco De Luca. "It's time. Schedule the council meeting. I want every piece of evidence ready to present." The reply came immediately. "Are you sure about this? There's no going back once you start." Luciana looked at her sleeping husband, at the man who'd promised her forever and delivered betrayal instead. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She set the phone aside and closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, she lay awake in the darkness, planning her next moves. The council meeting would be delicate. She'd need to present her case perfectly, appeal to their respect for tradition while demonstrating Victor's fundamental unfitness to lead. But she had everything she needed. The evidence was irrefutable, her bloodline was impeccable, and her resolve was absolute. Victor Blackwood had made his choice. Now he would live with the consequences. Or more accurately, he would learn to survive in the empire that no longer belonged to him. The empire that was finally coming home to the daughter of Giuseppe Castellano, where it had belonged all along. Outside the window, Chicago sparkled in the night. a city of infinite ambition and ruthless calculation. It was a city that understood power, respected legacy, and never forgave weakness. It was Luciana's city now. She just had to take it back. The Syndicate Council met on the first Tuesday of every month in a private room above a restaurant in Little Italy, neutral ground that had hosted power negotiations for decades. Luciana had attended exactly 3 of these meetings in 4 years of marriage, always as Victor's silent companion, ornamental and obedient. The old men who ran Chicago's underworld preferred their women beautiful and quiet, useful for appearances but irrelevant to actual business. Tonight would be different. She stood before her mirror, adjusting the collar of her black Armani suit. The outfit was severe, professional, designed to command respect rather than admiration. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her makeup minimal. She looked like what she was, Giuseppe Castellano's daughter, come to claim her inheritance. "You don't have to do this," Marco said from the doorway of her hotel suite. He'd been hovering nervously all morning, second-guessing the plan they'd spent 2 weeks perfecting. "We could find another way. Give it more time." Time for what? Luciana turned to face him. Time for Victor to discover what I'm planning. Time for him to move money, destroy evidence, turn the council against me before I even get a chance to speak. He doesn't suspect anything. You've played it perfectly. Which is exactly why we strike now, while he's comfortable. She picked up the leather portfolio containing copies of all their evidence. "My father used to say that the best time to attack is when your enemy thinks he's already won." Marco's weathered face softened. "Giuseppe would be proud of you, but he'd also tell you to be careful. These men, they're not going to like a woman challenging the established order." "Then they shouldn't have built their empire on my family's foundation," Luciana said coolly. She checked her phone. "Is everything in place?" "Silvio and Tommy are already at the restaurant. They'll back your play when the time comes. Carmine's still on the fence, but he owes your father's memory enough that he won't actively oppose you. The others," Marco shrugged, "they'll follow whoever they think is going to win. Then I'll make sure they know who that is." Luciana moved toward the door, then paused. "And Victor?" "Doesn't know about the meeting. As far as he's concerned, it's just the regular monthly session. He thinks you're at the spa." "Perfect." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Let's go remind Chicago who really runs this city." The drive to Little Italy took 20 minutes. Luciana spent it reviewing her notes, memorizing key figures and dates. She would need to be flawless. One mistake, one moment of uncertainty, and the council would dismiss her as an emotional woman seeking revenge for her husband's infidelity. They needed to see her as what she was, a legitimate heir to power, demanding what rightfully belonged to her bloodline. The restaurant was closed to the public, its windows shuttered. Marcus, Victor's head of security, stood outside and did a double-take when he saw Luciana emerge from her car. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, confused. "I didn't know you were attending today." "There's a lot you don't know, Marcus," she replied pleasantly, and walked past him into the building. The private room was on the 3rd floor, accessible only by a narrow staircase that had probably been an escape route during Prohibition. Luciana climbed it with her head high, Marco a reassuring presence behind her. At the top, she could hear voices. The council was already in session. She didn't knock. Instead, she pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. 7 men sat around a circular table, smoke from expensive cigars creating a haze in the air. Victor was at the head of the table, mid-sentence, when Luciana entered. His eyes widened in shock. "Lucy, what are you—" "Gentlemen," Luciana interrupted, her voice cutting through the room with unexpected authority. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me today." "We didn't agree to anything," said Frank Moretti, the oldest member of the council. He was 73, traditional as they came, and had made no secret of his disdain for women in business. "This is a closed session, Mrs. Blackwood. Wives aren't permitted." "I'm aware of the rules, Mr. Moretti," Luciana said calmly, moving to stand opposite Victor. "But I'm not here as Victor's wife. I'm here as Giuseppe Castellano's daughter and the rightful heir to my family's seat at this table." The room erupted in chaos. Victor shot to his feet, his face flushing red. "Luciana, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave immediately." "Sit down, Victor." Her voice cracked like a whip, and to everyone's surprise, he hesitated. I invoked my right to address the council under Article 7 of our founding charter. Marco, would you please read the relevant section? Marco stepped forward, producing a worn leather-bound book, the original syndicate charter, drafted in 1952. Article 7 states that any direct descendant of a founding family may petition the council for recognition if they can demonstrate both legitimate lineage and just cause for their claim. My father was one of the 5 founding families, Luciana continued, setting her portfolio on the table. His blood runs in my veins. That gives me the right to be heard. Silvio Russo, who'd been one of her father's closest allies, leaned back in his chair with interest. And what's your just cause, sweetheart? My just cause, Luciana said, opening the portfolio and beginning to distribute documents around the table, is that the man currently sitting in a seat built by my father's sacrifice has betrayed this council, stolen from this organization, and jeopardized everything we've built through his reckless personal decisions. Victor's face had gone from red to white. This is absurd. Luciana, you're upset about our personal issues, but that has nothing to do with— This has everything to do with business, she cut him off sharply. Please, gentlemen, examine the first document in front of you. Those are bank statements showing systematic withdrawals from our restaurants and clubs over the past 18 months. $3 million moved through shell corporations that Victor created without council approval. The men began studying the papers, their expressions growing serious. Tommy Carlyle, who ran the North Side operations, looked up with a frown. Victor, what is this? My wife has clearly been listening to bad advice, Victor said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Those are legitimate business expenses. For what business? Luciana demanded. The townhouse in Lincoln Park? The Mercedes you bought for your mistress? The trust fund you established for your bastard child? The word hung in the air like a grenade. Several council members exchanged glances. Carmine DeVito, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. Victor, is this true? My personal life is not the council's concern, Victor said tightly. It is when you're funding that personal life with money stolen from the family, Luciana countered. She moved around the table, commanding the room now. Turn to the second set of documents. Those are records of unauthorized deals Victor made without bringing them to the council. The shipment from Colombia that he told you fell through. He rerouted it through his own distributor and kept the profits. The protection money from businesses in neutral territory? That's been going into his personal accounts. Frank Moretti's face had turned the color of eggplant. These are serious accusations, girl. You better have proof beyond some papers your boyfriend put together. Marco didn't create these documents, Mr. Moretti. Victor did. We just found them. Luciana pulled out a thumb drive and set it on the table. That contains phone recordings, text messages, and emails that corroborate everything. You'll also find photographs of Victor with his mistress, receipts for property purchases, and evidence of his unauthorized business dealings. She let that sink in, watching the council members' faces as they absorbed the magnitude of Victor's betrayal. This was the critical moment, the point where they would either dismiss her as a vengeful wife or recognize her as a serious threat to their current power structure. Silvio was the first to speak. Even if all this is true, and I'm not saying it isn't, what exactly are you proposing, Luciana? You want us to remove Victor as boss over an affair? No, Luciana said quietly. I want you to recognize that Victor Blackwood has proven himself unfit to lead this organization. He's stolen from the family, made unauthorized deals that could bring law enforcement attention, and demonstrated that his personal desires matter more to him than the good of the syndicate. And who would replace him? Tommy asked. You? Why not me? Luciana met his eyes steadily. My family built the infrastructure that half this organization still relies on. The connections with the unions, the relationships with city officials, the safe houses and supply routes, all of that came from Castellano Resources. Victor married into power. I was born into it. You're a woman, Frank said bluntly. The families won't accept a woman as boss. The families will accept whoever this council tells them to accept, Luciana replied. And before you dismiss me based on my gender, remember that it was my father's strategy that ended the war with the Irish in '98. It was my mother's diplomatic connections that kept the feds off our backs during the corruption trials. The Castellano family has always understood that power isn't about who's the loudest or the most violent. It's about who's the smartest and the most connected. She pulled out a chair and sat down, uninvited, at the table. The gesture was bold, presumptuous, and exactly the kind of power move her father would have made. "I'm not asking you to make me boss," she continued. "I'm asking you to hold Victor accountable for his actions and recognize that the Castellano bloodline deserves representation in this organization's leadership. My proposal is simple. Victor keeps his title for appearance's sake, but real authority, financial decisions, strategic planning, personnel choices, comes through me and this council working together." Victor finally found his voice again. "This is a coup. You're trying to steal my position because I made a mistake in my personal life." "You made dozens of mistakes," Luciana said coldly, turning to face him. "You stole $3 million. You made unauthorized deals. You put this entire organization at risk because you couldn't keep your pants zipped. And when I gave you a choice between your empire and your pregnant mistress, you chose the empire without hesitation. You sent her to Australia, Victor. You abandoned your own child to keep your throne." She saw several council members react to that information. Even in their world, where violence and betrayal were currency, a man who would abandon his own blood was considered weak. "So yes," Luciana continued, "I'm proposing a change in leadership, but I'm doing it through proper channels, with evidence and a legitimate claim to power. That's more than Victor did when he consolidated control after marrying me. How many of you remember that he promised to honor my father's alliances? How many of those allies are still at this table?" The silence that followed was telling. Victor had systematically removed or sidelined most of Giuseppe's old associates, replacing them with his own people. Only Silvio, Tommy, and Carmine remained from the old guard. Carmine DeVito, who'd been studying the documents intently, looked up. "These Colombia shipment records. If the feds got hold of these, they could trace them back to all of us." "Victor, what the hell were you thinking?" "I was building our profits," Victor said defensively. "Everything I did was for the good of the organization." "Everything you did was for yourself," Silvio corrected. "Luciana's right about one thing. You got sloppy, arrogant, started thinking the rules didn't apply to you." Frank Moretti tapped his cigar against an ashtray, considering. "Even if we agree with your assessment, girl, what you're proposing is complicated. We can't just strip Victor of power without looking weak to the other families. And we sure as hell can't put a woman in charge without every two-bit crew in Chicago thinking they can make a move on us." "Which is why I'm not asking you to strip Victor of power publicly," Luciana explained patiently. "Let him keep the title, keep the appearance of authority, but institute a new structure. Call it a council oversight committee or a financial review board, whatever terminology makes you comfortable. The reality is that no major decision gets made without council approval, and I serve as the liaison between Victor and the council." She could see them processing this, recognizing the elegance of the solution. It gave them more control over Victor while saving face publicly. "It's essentially what we did with Angelo Benedetti back in 2003, Tommy observed. "When he started getting too ambitious, we put handlers on him. Worked fine until he retired. Us Angelo was a degenerate gambler who lost us money," Frank pointed out. "Victor's issue is different." "The solution is the same," Luciana countered. "You need someone you trust keeping watch over him. And who better than the daughter of Giuseppe Castellano? You all knew my father. You knew he valued this organization above everything else. That's the loyalty I'm offering you now." Silvio leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "And what's in it for you, Luciana, beyond revenge on your cheating husband?" "Recognition," she said simply. "My father died for this organization. My family built half of what we control. I want the Castellano name to mean something again, not just be a footnote in Victor Blackwood's rise to power. And yes, I want to make sure that the empire my father died building doesn't get destroyed by a man who values it less than I do." "You want power," Frank said flatly. "Of course I want power," Luciana replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Everyone at this table wants power. The question is whether you trust me to use it responsibly or whether you trust Victor after seeing evidence of his recklessness." The room fell silent as the council members exchanged glances, having entire conversations with looks and subtle nods. Luciana forced herself to remain still, to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. This was the moment that would determine everything. The council could just as easily dismiss her and maintain the status quo. Victor seemed to sense the shifting mood. You're all seriously considering this? Listening to my wife's hysterical accusations and thinking about restructuring our entire organization because I had an affair? Watch your tone, Carmine said sharply. Those aren't accusations, Victor. Those are bank records, phone logs, hard evidence that you've been running side operations without authorization. For the profit of the organization, for your own profit, Tommy interrupted. And you know what bothers me most? Not the girl, not even the money. It's that you thought we were stupid enough not to notice. That's disrespect, Victor. That's you thinking you're smarter than this whole council combined. Victor's jaw clenched. Luciana could see him struggling to control his temper, knowing that an outburst now would only confirm everything she'd said about his unfitness to lead. I made mistakes, he finally admitted, his voice tight. I should have been more transparent about the Columbia deal. The personal stuff, that was my business, but I shouldn't have used organization funds. I can repay that money. It's not about repayment, Silvio said quietly. It's about trust, about knowing that our boss's priorities are aligned with ours. And right now, looking at this evidence, I'm not sure they are. Frank stubbed out his cigar with more force than necessary. I don't like this. Don't like being forced into a decision by some girl with an agenda. Then don't think of it as being forced, Luciana said calmly. Think of it as an opportunity. Victor made mistakes, but he's also built relationships and maintained control. I'm not asking you to throw that away. I'm asking you to implement oversight that should have existed from the beginning. And if we say no? Frank challenged. Luciana smiled, but it was cold as winter. Then I take this evidence to the FBI, not to cooperate with them. I'm my father's daughter. I would never betray the family. But I'll make sure it leaks in a way that triggers an investigation into Victor specifically. The council would survive. Victor wouldn't. And in the chaos that followed, I'd still end up with what I'm asking for now, just with a lot more bloodshed and federal attention. You wouldn't, Victor breathed. Lucy, you wouldn't destroy everything we built? You destroyed it when you chose your mistress over your marriage, she said softly, looking at him directly for the first time since the meeting began. You destroyed it when you stole from the family. You destroyed it when you proved that your word, your promises, your vows, your commitments meant nothing. I'm just being honest about the consequences. The threat hung in the air, and Luciana could see the council members absorbing it. She was offering them a clean solution, a way to maintain control and save face. The alternative was chaos, and these men had survived decades in power by avoiding chaos whenever possible. Silvio was the first to break the silence. I vote we implement the oversight structure Luciana proposed. Let Victor keep his title and public authority, but major financial and strategic decisions come through council approval, with Luciana serving as the liaison. Seconded, Tommy said immediately. Carmine hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. The Castellano family deserves representation, and this structure makes sense given the circumstances. Frank Moretti looked like he'd bitten into something sour, but he finally nodded as well. Fine, but this doesn't make you boss, girl. You're staff, you understand? An advisor. You don't make decisions. We do. I understand perfectly, Mr. Moretti, Luciana said graciously, though they both knew she'd just won far more than the title of advisor. The other three council members, younger men who'd risen under Victor's leadership, looked uncertain. But they'd seen the writing on the wall. The old guard had spoken, and opposing them would be suicide. All in favor? Silvio called. 7 hands rose, including, after a long moment, Victor's. He knew refusing would only make everything worse. Motion carries, Silvio declared. Effective immediately, the council implements enhanced oversight of all major organizational decisions. Luciana Castellano Blackwood will serve as council liaison and financial advisor. Victor Blackwood remains as boss but operates under council authority. It was done. In less than an hour, Luciana had accomplished what she'd spent 2 weeks planning. She'd taken the empire from Victor without firing a single shot, without spilling a drop of blood. She'd used his own arrogance and betrayal against him, and now the power he'd thought was his had been transferred to her hands. The meeting broke up shortly after, the council members filing out in ones and twos. Marco caught Luciana's eye and gave her a subtle nod of approval before disappearing down the stairs. Soon, only Luciana and Victor remained in the room. He stood across the table from her, his expression a mixture of shock, rage, and something that might have been grudging respect. That was quite a performance, he said finally. Very impressive. My wife, the master manipulator. I learned from the best, Luciana replied. You taught me how to smile and lie at the same time, how to make people think they're getting what they want, while you take everything that matters. I just applied those lessons to a different situation. Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think you've won. You think you've taken my power. I know I have. For now, he said, moving around the table toward her. But power in our world isn't about council votes and oversight committees, Lucy. It's about respect, fear, loyalty. The men might have voted for your proposal today, but they'll never really accept you as an equal. You're still just a woman in a man's world. Maybe, Luciana conceded, but I'm a woman who controls the money, the strategy, and the legacy that built this organization. While you're busy trying to earn back the respect you lost, I'll be consolidating the power I just gained, and by the time you realize what's happening, it'll be too late. She picked up her portfolio and moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Victor? That second phone you keep in the safe? I'd recommend getting rid of it. Isabella has been texting from Australia, saying she made a mistake and wants to come back. If the council finds out you're still in contact with her after everything that happened today, they won't be so forgiving next time. Victor's face went pale. You've been monitoring my communications? I've been monitoring everything, Luciana said calmly. That's what people in power do. They pay attention. You should try it sometime. She left him standing there, descended the stairs, and walked out into the Chicago afternoon. The city stretched before her, no longer Victor's kingdom, but increasingly her own. She'd reclaimed her birthright, avenged her father's memory, and punished Victor's betrayal all in one calculated move. But as she climbed into her car, Luciana felt no triumph, only the cold satisfaction of a job well done, and the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The council had given her oversight authority, but she wanted more than that. She wanted complete control, wanted to build an empire that would make her father's legacy look small by comparison. And she would get it. One careful step at a time, she would dismantle Victor's remaining power until he was nothing but a figurehead, a title without substance. He would watch as everything he'd built slipped through his fingers, and he would know, truly know, what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. Just as Luciana had known when she'd discovered his betrayal. The war between them had just begun, and only one of them would survive it with their power intact. Victor still thought he could outmaneuver her, could use his connections and reputation to undermine the council's decision. He had no idea who he was fighting, no idea that Luciana had already planned 10 moves ahead, had already begun implementing the next phase of her strategy. By the time Victor Blackwood realized he'd lost, Luciana Castellano would be sitting on a throne he couldn't even see being built beneath him. And that, she thought as her car merged into Chicago traffic, was exactly how her father would have done it. The first week after the council meeting passed in careful choreography. Victor went through the motions of leadership while Luciana quietly inserted herself into every decision, every transaction, every conversation that mattered. She was everywhere and nowhere, a shadow that had suddenly gained substance. On Thursday morning, she walked into the penthouse office where Victor was meeting with his distribution managers. The conversation stopped mid-sentence when she entered. "Don't let me interrupt," Luciana said pleasantly, settling into the empty chair beside Victor. "I'm just here to observe. Council oversight, you understand?" The managers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victor's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. We were just discussing the new route through Gary. The one that cuts through territory we promised the Italians we'd avoid?" Luciana asked, her tone conversational. She opened her tablet, scrolling through notes. "Because I have the treaty we signed in 2019 right here, and it specifically designates that corridor as neutral ground." One of the managers, a thick-necked man named Paulie, shifted in his seat. "Boss said the Italians wouldn't notice a few trucks passing through." "The Italians notice everything," Luciana replied, "which is why violating that treaty would give them justification to retaliate, potentially costing us millions in disrupted operations. Is that really worth shaving 30 minutes off your delivery time?" Paulie looked at Victor, who was staring at Luciana with barely concealed fury. "Find another route," Victor said tersely, "one that doesn't risk our agreements." "Smart choice," Luciana said, making a note on her tablet. "Gentlemen, while I have you here, I'd like to review the inventory discrepancies from last month. Someone want to explain why we're showing 15,000 in missing product?" The meeting stretched from 30 minutes to 2 hours as Luciana systematically dissected their operation, finding inefficiencies and irregularities that Victor had either missed or ignored. By the time she dismissed the managers, they were looking at her with a mixture of resentment and grudging respect. Victor waited until they were alone before exploding. "What the hell was that? You made me look incompetent in front of my own people." "Your people need to understand that things have changed," Luciana said calmly, not looking up from her tablet. "And you did look incompetent, Victor. 15,000 in missing inventory? A delivery route that violates our treaties? These are basic operational failures. I've been running this organization successfully for years." "You've been running it into the ground," she interrupted, finally meeting his eyes. "I've spent the last week reviewing our books, Victor. Really reviewing them, not just glancing at summary reports. Do you know how much money we're losing to skimming? How many of your trusted managers are stealing from us?" Victor went very still, mamka. "What are you talking about?" Luciana pulled up a spreadsheet on her tablet and turned it toward him. "Polly's been skimming 2% off every shipment for the last 8 months. That's $80,000. Your club manager on Rush Street has been reporting lower revenues while pocketing the difference. Another 60,000. Should I continue?" "You can't prove I can prove all of it," Luciana said. "Bank records, surveillance footage, testimony from employees who are more loyal to the Castellano name than to your management style. The question is what we do about it." Victor slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him. "What do you want, Lucy? You've already taken my authority, humiliated me in front of the council. What more is there?" "I want you to start taking this seriously," she said, her voice softer now. "You built something powerful, Victor, but you got lazy, arrogant. You thought loyalty was automatic, that respect was permanent. It isn't. You have to earn it every single day, and the moment you stop paying attention, people start taking advantage." "Like you're doing?" "I'm not taking advantage. I'm doing the job you should have been doing all along." Luciana closed her tablet and stood. "Tomorrow, I'm firing Polly and 3 other managers who've been stealing. I'm restructuring the distribution network to improve efficiency. And I'm implementing new financial controls that will prevent this kind of theft in the future. You can support these decisions publicly, or you can fight me and look even weaker. Your choice." She walked out, leaving Victor staring after her with an expression that was equal parts rage and defeat. But Luciana wasn't finished. Over the next 2 weeks, she systematically dismantled the infrastructure Victor had built, replacing his loyalists with people who remembered her father, who understood that the Castellano legacy was Chicago's real foundation. She was careful about it, strategic, never moving so fast that it looked like a purge, always framing changes as efficiency improvements or necessary corrections. The council watched with approval. Profits increased as she eliminated waste and theft. Operations became smoother, more professional. And with each improvement, Luciana's authority grew while Victor's diminished. She knew he was planning something. Victor wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and she could see the calculation in his eyes whenever they were in the same room. He was looking for an angle, a way to undermine her authority and reclaim his power. The attack came 3 weeks after the council meeting. Luciana was in the downtown office, reviewing contracts with Marco, when her phone buzzed with a message from Silvio Russo. "Emergency council meeting tonight, 8 p.m., Victor called it." She showed the message to Marco, who frowned. "He's making his move." "Finally," Luciana said. "I was wondering how long it would take him to stop sulking and start fighting back." "You sound almost pleased." "I am pleased. This means he's desperate, and desperate men make mistakes." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Call Silvio and Tommy. I want to know exactly what Victor's planning to present tonight." By 6 o'clock, she had her answer. Victor had discovered evidence, or claimed to have discovered evidence, that Luciana had been meeting secretly with representatives from the Irish mob. He was going to accuse her of plotting to sell out the Italian families in exchange for territory on the west side. "It's complete fabrication," Marco said, pacing Luciana's office. "You've never met with any Irish representatives." "Actually, I have," Luciana said calmly. "Twice, about 3 weeks ago. But they were courtesy calls, nothing more. Old family friends paying respects after my father's death anniversary." Marco stopped pacing. "How does Victor know about meetings you had 3 weeks ago?" "Because I wanted him to know," Luciana replied. I made sure those meetings happened in semi-public places where his surveillance would catch them. I've been waiting for him to use it against me. You set a trap. I set a trap, she confirmed. Victor's so focused on destroying me that he's not thinking clearly. He sees evidence of Irish meetings and immediately jumps to betrayal without asking himself why I would be stupid enough to conduct treasonous meetings in places where I could be observed. What's the real story? Luciana smiled. The Irish representatives were there because I asked them to be. I'm negotiating a peace treaty that will expand our territory while giving them access to our distribution network for their legitimate businesses. It's a win-win that will make the organization millions. But Victor doesn't know that because he's only been paying attention to the meetings themselves, not to what was discussed. Marco started laughing. You're going to make him look paranoid and incompetent. I'm going to make him look exactly like what he is. A man so consumed with maintaining power that he sees threats where there are opportunities. Luciana checked her watch. Come on, we don't want to be late for my husband's attempted coup. The council was already assembled when Luciana arrived. Victor sat at the head of the table, looking confident for the first time in weeks. He had documents spread in front of him, photographs that Luciana recognized even from across the room. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Victor began. I've discovered something that requires immediate attention, something that threatens the security of this entire organization. This should be good, Silvio muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Victor shot him a look but continued. For the past month, my wife has been conducting secret meetings with representatives of the Irish mob. I have photographs, surveillance logs, and witness testimony that she's been negotiating behind our backs, potentially selling us out to our enemies. He slid the photographs across the table. They showed Luciana meeting with Sean O'Brien and Patrick Donnelly, two prominent Irish bosses, at a cafe in River North. Frank Moretti picked up one of the photos, studying it. These meetings did happen? They happened, Luciana confirmed before Victor could speak. And I'm happy to explain exactly what was discussed, since my husband apparently didn't bother to find out before calling this emergency session. Victor's confidence wavered slightly. You admit to secret negotiations with the Irish? I admit to preliminary discussions about a treaty that would benefit everyone at this table, Luciana said. Discussions that I plan to bring to the council once terms were finalized. But since you forced the issue, Victor, I suppose we can discuss it now. She pulled out her own tablet, connecting it to the screen on the wall. A detailed proposal appeared, complete with territory maps and financial projections. The Irish control several legitimate businesses on the west side, restaurants, construction companies, shipping firms. They want access to our distribution network to expand their operations. In exchange, they're offering us exclusive territory rights in neighborhoods they currently dispute with the Polish crews. The projected profit increase is approximately $4 million annually, with minimal risk to our current operations. The council members leaned forward, studying the proposal with interest. It was comprehensive, professional, exactly the kind of strategic expansion they'd been looking for. Why didn't you bring this to us immediately? Carmine asked. Because negotiations were still preliminary, Luciana explained. The Irish wanted assurances that we were serious before they committed to terms. I was establishing good faith, building rapport. Once I had concrete terms to present, I was going to request a formal council session. Instead, my husband jumped to conclusions and accused me of treason. She turned to Victor, her expression almost pitying. Did you even read the surveillance reports? Or did you just see photographs of me with the Irish and assume the worst? Victor's face had gone red. You should have informed the council before taking any meetings. Like you informed us before meeting with the Colombians, Tommy interrupted, or before making that deal with the Southside Cruise last year. Seems like you've made plenty of unilateral decisions in your time, Victor. That's different. It's exactly the same, Silvio said. Except Luciana's deal actually looks profitable and doesn't violate any treaties. Your Colombia thing almost got us all indicted. Frank Moretti was still studying the proposal. This is solid work. When can we finalize these terms? I can have a formal agreement ready for council approval within 2 weeks, Luciana said. The Irish are eager to proceed, and I believe this partnership will open doors to other legitimate business opportunities that have been closed to us. I vote we authorize Luciana to continue negotiations, Silvio said. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need. Seconded, Tommy added. The vote was unanimous. even Frank Moretti agreeing that the Irish deal made sense. Victor sat in stunned silence as the council praised Luciana's initiative and approved her proposal. After the meeting, after the other council members had left, Victor remained at the table while Luciana gathered her materials. "You planned this," he said quietly. "The meetings, the photographs, knowing I'd find out and react badly. You set me up." "I gave you rope," Luciana corrected. "You hanged yourself. If you'd approached this rationally, asked me about the meetings before calling an emergency session, I would have explained everything. But you were so desperate to discredit me that you didn't stop to think. You're destroying me." "No, Victor. You destroyed yourself the moment you chose your mistress over your marriage. I'm just making sure you understand the consequences." She paused at the door. "And for the record, this is far from over. Every move you make, every decision you try to undermine, I'll be 3 steps ahead. Because unlike you, I actually understand how to play this game." The weeks that followed established a new pattern. Victor would attempt to reassert his authority, and Luciana would systematically dismantle his efforts while expanding her own power base. She was ruthless, but never cruel, professional, but never cold. The organization thrived under her oversight, and the council increasingly deferred to her judgment over Victor's. But there was something else happening too, something Luciana hadn't anticipated. The more time she spent actually running the organization, the more she realized how much she enjoyed it. This wasn't about revenge anymore, wasn't just about punishing Victor for his betrayal. She was good at this: strategy, negotiation, reading people and situations. She was building something real, something that would outlast her father's legacy and Victor's incompetence combined. One evening, Marco found her in the office at midnight, still reviewing distribution reports. "You need to go home," he said gently. "Get some sleep." "I'm almost done," Luciana replied, not looking up. "Just need to finalize these route adjustments." "Luciana." Marco's voice was firm enough that she finally looked at him. "This isn't healthy. You're working 18-hour days, running yourself into the ground. Yes, you've taken control from Victor. Yes, you've proven yourself to the council, but at what cost?" "The cost of actually doing the job right," she said. "Someone has to." "Your father worked himself to death," Marco said quietly. "Literally. The stress, the long hours, the constant battles. It killed him at 56. I don't want to see the same thing happen to you." Luciana set down her pen, rubbing her tired eyes. "I'm not my father." "No, you're more driven than he ever was. Giuseppe wanted power. You want perfection, and that's going to consume you if you're not careful." She knew he was right, but admitting it felt like weakness. "What am I supposed to do? Let Victor reclaim control? Watch everything I've built fall apart?" "No, but maybe consider that you've won. You have the council's support, the organization's respect, and complete authority over operations. Victor's neutered, Lucy. He can't hurt you anymore. So maybe it's time to think about what comes next." "What do you mean?" Marco sat down across from her. "I mean, maybe it's time to make this official. Go to the council, propose removing Victor entirely, and taking the title of boss yourself. Stop pretending he's still in charge and claim the throne outright." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Luciana had thought about it, of course, had imagined walking into the council meeting and demanding Victor's complete removal, but something had held her back. "They're not ready for a woman boss," she said finally. "Frank made that clear. Even Silvio and Tommy, who support me, would balk at making it official." "They would have balked a month ago," Marco agreed. "But you've proven yourself since then. The Irish treaty, the efficiency improvements, the increased profits. You've shown them what real leadership looks like. And Victor's attempted coup tonight just demonstrated how desperate and incompetent he's become. The contrast couldn't be clearer. It's still a risk. Everything worth having is a risk," Marco said. "But I've been in this business for 40 years, and I can tell you right now that the council knows who really runs things. Making it official is just acknowledging reality." Luciana considered this, turning the idea over in her mind. Marco was right that the practical transfer of power had already occurred. Victor was a figurehead, going through motions while she made every decision that mattered. But there was a difference between exercising power and claiming it, between being the shadow ruler and sitting openly on the throne. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Don't think too long. Marco advised. The longer Victor remains as nominal boss, the more opportunity he has to cause problems. And he will cause problems, Lucy. Men like him can't help themselves. He was right about that, too. Victor had accepted his diminished role with surprising grace over the past few weeks, which should have been Luciana's first warning that he was planning something. Men like Victor Blackwood didn't surrender power without a fight. The real attack came 2 days later, and it came from a direction Luciana hadn't anticipated. She was at the penthouse, reviewing contracts, when Victor came home early. He looked pleased with himself, a smile playing at his lips that immediately put her on guard. "Good news," he announced, pouring himself a drink. "I've been talking with some associates about expanding our operations into the northwest suburbs. Big opportunity, lots of potential." Luciana set down her papers. "What associates?" "Just some business connections, old friends who are interested in partnering with us." His smile widened. "In fact, they're coming to dinner tomorrow night. I thought it would be good for you to meet them, since you're so involved in operations now." Every instinct Luciana had screamed danger. Victor wasn't the type to include her in meetings unless he had an ulterior motive. "What's really going on?" "Nothing's going on. Can a husband invite his wife to a business dinner?" He moved closer, and there was something predatory in his expression. "Unless you're not interested in meeting some very influential people who could help take our organization to the next level?" "Who are these people?" "All will be revealed tomorrow," Victor said. 8 o'clock. "Wear something impressive." He walked out, leaving Luciana with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She immediately called Marco. "He's up to something," she said without preamble. "Victor's suddenly all smiles and business opportunities. He's arranged a dinner with unnamed associates for tomorrow night." "That's not good," Marco agreed. "You want me to find out who these associates are?" "As quickly as possible. And Marco, be discreet. If Victor realizes I'm investigating, it'll tip our hand." By the next afternoon, Marco had answers, and they weren't good. "The dinner guests are FBI," he said, his voice grim over the phone. "Special Agent Linda Morrison and her partner, Agent Ryan Chen. They've been investigating organized crime in Chicago for the past 3 years. Luciana's blood ran cold. "Victor invited federal agents to our home?" "It gets worse. According to my source, Morrison's been in communication with Victor for weeks. He's been feeding them information about the organization's operations in exchange for immunity." The betrayal was so massive, so complete, that Luciana couldn't speak for a moment. Victor wasn't just trying to discredit her or reclaim his power. He was destroying the entire organization to save himself. "Does the council know?" she finally asked. "Not yet, but if Victor's meeting openly with FBI agents at your penthouse, it won't stay secret for long. This is exactly the kind of thing that gets people killed, Lucy. The council won't tolerate cooperation with federal investigators." "Unless he's setting me up," Luciana said slowly, understanding dawning. "He invites the agents to dinner, introduces them as business associates. I show up, participate in the meeting, and suddenly I'm the one caught socializing with FBI while Victor claims he had no idea who they really were." "That son of a bitch," Marco breathed. "He's trying to frame you for cooperation. And if it works, the council will have to remove me, probably permanently." Luciana's mind was racing, seeing the trap Victor had laid and looking for a way to turn it against him. "How solid is your source on Victor's communications with the FBI?" "Very solid. I can get you proof. Emails, phone records, the whole thing." "Do it. I need everything you can get me by 6 o'clock tonight." She checked her watch. "And Marco? Call an emergency council meeting for 10 o'clock tomorrow night. Tell them I have critical intelligence about a security threat to the organization." "You're going to let the dinner happen?" "I'm going to spring Victor's trap on himself," Luciana said. "He wants to introduce me to FBI agents? Fine. Let's see how that works out for him." The next evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. Luciana dressed carefully in a navy Dior suit that spoke of power rather than seduction. Her hair swept back in a severe bun that made her look older, more formidable. She studied herself in the mirror and saw her father's daughter staring back, cold, calculating, ready for war. Victor was already in the living room when she emerged, adjusting his cufflinks with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd finally outmaneuvered his opponent. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered in his eyes. Appreciation, perhaps, or regret for what he was about to destroy. "You look beautiful," he said. I look like someone you're about to betray, Luciana replied evenly. Again. His smile didn't waver. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you? She moved to the bar, pouring herself a vodka she had no intention of drinking. Tell me, Victor, when you invited Special Agent Linda Morrison and her partner to our home, did you really think I wouldn't find out who they were? The color drained from Victor's face. For a moment, he looked genuinely shocked. Then the mask slammed back into place. You're paranoid, Lucy. These are legitimate business contacts. Stop lying, she said quietly. You've been communicating with the FBI for weeks, feeding them information about our operations in exchange for immunity. And tonight, you're planning to introduce me to federal agents as business associates. Let me incriminate myself in conversation and then claim ignorance when everything falls apart. That's insane. I have the emails, Victor, the phone records, everything. Luciana set down her untouched drink. What I don't understand is why. You're not stupid enough to think cooperation would actually save you. The moment the council learns you've been talking to the FBI, you're dead. So what's the play? What do you possibly gain from this? Victor was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, more honest than she'd heard in months. I gain my life back. My authority. My respect. You've systematically destroyed me, Lucy. Stripped away my power, made me a joke in front of men I used to command. This is my only move left. Destroying the organization destroys you too. Not if I've already cut a deal, Victor said. Witness protection, new identity, enough money to start over somewhere else. The FBI has been very generous with their offers. And you'd actually do it? Luciana stared at him, seeing a stranger. You'd betray everyone, your associates, your crew, the families that supported your rise, just to escape the consequences of your own mistakes? You left me no choice. The words exploded from Victor with unexpected venom. You took everything from me. My power, my reputation, my authority. You humiliated me in front of the council, turned my own people against me, made me a prisoner in the empire I built. What did you expect me to do? Just accept it? I expected you to take responsibility, Luciana said. You betrayed me, stole from the organization, made reckless decisions that put everyone at risk. The council's oversight wasn't punishment, Victor. It was mercy. But apparently you're too arrogant to see the difference. The doorbell rang. Victor's expression shifted, became almost triumphant. That'll be our guests. I suggest you be very careful what you say tonight, Lucy. The FBI is very good at building cases from casual conversations. I'm sure they are, Luciana agreed and opened the door. Special Agent Linda Morrison was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a professional smile that didn't quite reach them. Her partner, Agent Chen, was younger, carrying a briefcase that probably contained recording equipment. They looked exactly like what they were, federal investigators pretending to be something else. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, Morrison said warmly, extending her hand. Thank you so much for having us. Our pleasure, Victor said smoothly, playing his role. Please come in. Can I offer you a drink? They made small talk as Victor poured drinks, the agents asking innocuous questions about the penthouse, the view, how long they'd lived in Chicago. Luciana played along, answering politely while watching Victor relax into his performance. He thought he was in control, thought he was directing this scene toward her destruction. He had no idea what was coming. After 15 minutes of pleasantries, Morrison steered the conversation toward business. Victor mentioned you've been expanding operations recently. That must be exciting. It's been an interesting process, Luciana said carefully. Lots of moving parts to coordinate. I imagine the logistics are complex, Chen added. Distribution networks, personnel management, financial oversight. How do you keep track of everything? It was a clumsy attempt at elicitation, the kind of question designed to get her talking about operational details. Luciana smiled. Very carefully, Agent Chen. Morrison's professional mask slipped for just a second. I'm sorry? I said we're very careful about operational security, Agent Chen, Luciana repeated, especially when federal investigators are trying to build a case based on dinner conversation. The room went silent. Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward her briefcase, toward whatever recording device was inside. Victor had frozen, his drink halfway to his lips. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Morrison said carefully. We're business consultants. You're FBI, Luciana interrupted. Special Agent Linda Morrison and Agent Ryan Chen, Chicago Field Office, Organized Crime Division. You've been investigating the Blackwood organization for 3 years with minimal success. So when my husband approached you offering cooperation in exchange for immunity, you jumped at the opportunity. Chen's hand was on his weapon now, though he hadn't drawn it. Mrs. Blackwood, anything you say can and will be used against me, yes, I know. Luciana remained seated, completely calm. But here's what you need to understand, agents. I didn't invite you here. I didn't initiate any cooperation with federal authorities. My husband did, without my knowledge or consent, in an attempt to frame me for the very crimes he's actually committed. That's a lie, Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Luciana pulled out her phone, connecting it to the television screen. Emails appeared. Communications between Victor and Morrison dating back 6 weeks. These are your exchanges with the FBI, Victor. Discussions about immunity deals, offers to provide evidence, arrangements for tonight's meeting. All of it in your name, from your accounts. Morrison was staring at the screen, her face impassive but her eyes calculating. She'd been played, Luciana realized. The FBI had thought they were getting a cooperative witness, but Victor had been planning to deliver Luciana instead. I'm prepared to provide you with something much more valuable than dinner conversation, Luciana continued. I have documented evidence of my husband's unauthorized business dealings, financial crimes, and violations of interstate commerce laws. I'm talking about concrete evidence, bank records, shipping manifests, communications with foreign suppliers. Everything you'd need to build a real case. In exchange for what? Morrison asked sharply. In exchange for nothing, Luciana said. I'm not asking for immunity or protection. I'm simply providing you with information about criminal activity that I became aware of during my oversight of family business operations. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. Victor surged to his feet. You can't do this. I can do whatever I want, Luciana said coldly. You tried to destroy me, Victor. You tried to turn me into a federal informant to save yourself. Now you're going to learn what actual betrayal feels like. She turned back to Morrison. The evidence is already in your Chicago field office email system, sent from an anonymous account approximately 2 hours ago. You'll find detailed documentation of Victor Blackwood's operations over the past 4 years, including activities that occurred before I had any oversight role in the organization. I suggest you review it carefully. Morrison exchanged a look with Chen, and Luciana could see them processing this new development. They'd come here expecting to trap a mob wife in incriminating statements. Instead, they were being handed a completely different case. Why are you doing this, Farah? Morrison asked. You're his wife. You benefit from his criminal enterprise. I'm also Giuseppe Castellano's daughter, Luciana replied, and my father taught me that loyalty is a two-way street. Victor betrayed me, betrayed the organization we built together, and then tried to frame me for his cooperation with federal authorities. I don't owe him anything except the truth about what he's done. The evidence you're providing, it incriminates you too. Some of it might, Luciana acknowledged, but I'm confident that any competent attorney could demonstrate that I was acting under my husband's direction and control during the relevant time periods, especially given the evidence of his coercion and manipulation that's also included in the documentation. It was a calculated risk, but Luciana had reviewed every document Marco had compiled. She'd been careful over the years, keeping herself insulated from Victor's more blatant criminal activities. The evidence would destroy Victor while leaving her with plausible deniability. Morrison stood, Chen following her lead. We're going to need you to come to the field office for a formal interview. I'm happy to cooperate, Luciana said. Tomorrow morning, I'll bring my attorney. But tonight would be better. Tomorrow morning, Luciana repeated firmly. I have other business to attend to tonight, but I'll be at your office at 9 a.m. sharp, with legal representation and a willingness to answer your questions fully and honestly. Morrison clearly wanted to push, but she also knew that Luciana was offering herself voluntarily. Arresting her now would be premature, especially without reviewing the evidence that had supposedly been sent to their office. 9 a.m., Morrison agreed finally. Don't make us come looking for you. I won't, Luciana promised, and showed them to the door. The moment they left, Victor exploded. You just destroyed both of us. The FBI has everything now. They'll tear apart the whole organization. They have everything about you, Luciana corrected. Your deals, your crimes, your betrayals. I made very sure that the evidence focuses on activities you conducted independently, without council approval or my knowledge. You think the council will see it that way? You just cooperated with federal investigators. I provided evidence of criminal activity by a man who was actively betraying the organization to those same investigators, Luciana said. There's a difference, Victor, and the council will understand that difference when I explain it to them in about 90 minutes. Victor's face went from red to white. The council meeting. You called it for tonight. Of course I did. You don't think I was going to let you control the narrative, do you? Luciana picked up her purse. You should pack a bag. I suspect you'll be spending some time in federal custody very soon, and you'll want a decent suit for your arraignment. Lucy, wait. Victor's voice cracked. We can fix this. We can tell the FBI it was all a misunderstanding, that we were testing their investigation. We can do nothing, Luciana said. You made your choice when you contacted the FBI. You chose to save yourself at the expense of everyone else. Now you get to live with the consequences. She walked out of the penthouse, leaving her husband standing alone in the wreckage of his final gambit. The council meeting started at 10 o'clock in the same private room where Luciana had first challenged Victor's authority. This time, when she entered, 7 grim faces turned toward her. They'd heard rumors already, Victor's panicked phone calls to various members, trying to spin the evening's events in his favor. Before Victor says anything, Luciana began, taking her seat without waiting for permission, I want to explain exactly what happened tonight and why I made the decisions I made. You cooperated with federal agents, Frank Moretti said flatly. In our world, that's a death sentence. I provided evidence of Victor's cooperation with federal agents, Luciana corrected. There's a significant difference. Victor had been communicating with the FBI for weeks, offering them information in exchange for immunity. Tonight, he invited FBI agents to our home under false pretenses, intending to trap me in incriminating conversation while he escaped prosecution. She pulled out her tablet, displaying the same emails she'd shown Morrison and Chen. These are his communications with the FBI. You'll see that he initiated contact, offered cooperation, and arranged tonight's meeting. My only involvement was discovering his plan and turning it against him. Silvio was reading the emails, his expression growing darker with each line. This son of a bitch was going to rat on all of us. Not all of you, Luciana said. Just enough to secure his immunity and destroy me in the process. But when I confronted the FBI agents with evidence of Victor's actual crimes that I documented during my oversight of operations, they lost interest in his cooperation agreement. What did you give them? Carmine demanded. Everything about Victor's unauthorized deals, his financial crimes, his violations of the agreements we'd made with other families. Nothing about council-approved operations, nothing that would implicate anyone in this room. Just Victor's personal betrayals. Tommy Carlyle looked sick. You handed him to the feds. I handed a federal informant to the feds, Luciana said. What would you have had me do? Let Victor destroy this organization to save himself? Allow him to turn us all into co-defendants in a federal conspiracy case? You should have come to us first, Frank said. Let the council decide how to handle it. There wasn't time, Luciana replied. The FBI was already in my home. Victor's trap was already sprung. I made a split-second decision to protect the organization by sacrificing the man who'd already betrayed it. The room fell silent as the council members absorbed this. Luciana could see them weighing the risks, calculating the implications. She'd violated one of their most sacred rules, never cooperate with law enforcement, but she'd done it to stop someone who'd violated an even more fundamental rule. Victor, who'd been sitting at the far end of the table, finally found his voice. She's trying to cover her own guilt. Everything she's saying is a lie designed to— Shut up, Silvio said without looking at him. You contacted the FBI. You arranged meetings. You tried to trade our secrets for your freedom. Everything else is just details. I was trying to save myself from her. Victor pointed at Luciana. She'd taken everything from me, made me a prisoner in my own organization. What was I supposed to do? Accept the consequences of your actions, Carmine said coldly. You stole from the family, made unauthorized deals, and embarrassed yourself with that mistress situation. The council showed you mercy by letting you keep your title, but instead of being grateful, you decided to burn everything down. I vote for immediate termination, Tommy said. Victor Blackwood is a threat to this organization and needs to be eliminated before he can do more damage. Seconded, Silvio agreed. Luciana felt a chill run through her. She'd known this was a possibility, that the council would order Victor's death, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Wait, she said. Before you vote on that, consider the practical implications. If Victor disappears or dies right now, the FBI will know we found out about his cooperation. That brings more heat on us, more investigation, more scrutiny. But if we let the federal case proceed naturally, Victor gets arrested, prosecuted, and imprisoned for his crimes. The FBI gets their victory. We get rid of a traitor, and it all looks legitimate. Frank Moretti studied her with narrowed eyes. You've got this all figured out, don't you? I've tried to think several steps ahead, Luciana acknowledged. Victor made his choice to betray us, but we don't have to make our response obvious. Let the system handle him. He'll spend the next 20 years in a federal prison, and we move forward without the complications that come with a more direct solution. She's protecting him, Victor said desperately. Can't you see that? She wants me in prison instead of dead because she's still... I want you in prison because it's the smart play, Luciana interrupted. If I wanted to protect you, Victor, I would have warned you before the FBI showed up. I would have destroyed the evidence instead of sending it to federal investigators. Don't confuse strategic thinking with mercy. The council voted. 6 in favor of letting the federal case proceed, 1 against. Frank Moretti had wanted Victor dead immediately, but even he could see the wisdom in Luciana's approach. Motion carries, Silvio announced. Victor Blackwood is hereby stripped of all authority and expelled from this organization. When the FBI arrests him, and they will arrest him, we provide no support, no legal assistance, no interference with their investigation. What about his title? Tommy asked. We can't leave the boss position empty. All eyes turned to Luciana. This was the moment she'd been working toward for weeks, the culmination of every strategy and sacrifice. The council was about to offer her the throne she'd been building beneath Victor's feet. I nominate Luciana Castellano Blackwood as interim boss, Silvio said, to be confirmed as permanent boss pending a 6-month evaluation period. Seconded, Carmine said immediately. Even Frank Moretti, who'd opposed female leadership from the beginning, nodded slowly. She's earned it, he admitted grudgingly. And she's Giuseppe's daughter. That counts for something. The vote was unanimous. Just like that, Luciana had achieved what months ago would have seemed impossible. She was the official boss of Chicago's largest criminal syndicate, the first woman to hold that position in the organization's 70-year history. Thank you, she said simply. I won't disappoint you. See that you don't, Frank said, because the other families are going to test you. They're going to see a woman boss as weakness, as an opportunity to take territory or make moves. You'll need to prove yourself strong enough to hold what you've claimed. I understand, Luciana said, and I'm ready. Victor was staring at her with something approaching awe. You planned all of this. From the very beginning, from the moment you found out about Isabella, you've been planning to take everything. No, Luciana said quietly. From the moment I found out about Isabella, I planned to survive. Everything else, the power, the position, the throne, that's just what survival looks like when you refuse to be a victim. She stood, and the council stood with her, a sign of respect they'd never shown Victor. Gentlemen, I suggest we adjourn. It's late, and we all have preparations to make for the transition. Victor, I'd recommend you speak with a good criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one. As the council members filed out, offering Luciana congratulations and promises of support, Victor remained seated at the table. He looked smaller somehow, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. Luciana paused at the door, looking back at the man she'd married 4 years ago. I really did love you, she said. That's the part I don't think you ever understood. This wasn't about ambition or revenge. It was about refusing to let you destroy me the way you destroyed everything else you touched. I loved you too, Victor said, and for once she thought he might actually be telling the truth. That's why this hurts so much. Then you should have thought about that before you put your hands on another woman's pregnant belly, Luciana replied. before you stole from our organization, before you contacted the FBI to save yourself. Love isn't just a feeling, Victor. It's a choice, and you chose wrong." She walked out, and this time she didn't look back. The FBI arrested Victor Blackwood 3 days later at a restaurant in the Loop. The federal indictment was 60 pages long, detailing a comprehensive pattern of racketeering, money laundering, and interstate commerce violations. The evidence was overwhelming, exactly as Luciana had ensured it would be. Victor's attorney tried to argue that his client had been cooperating with federal authorities and deserved consideration for his assistance. But Morrison testified that Victor's cooperation had been limited and self-serving, designed to implicate others while protecting himself. The judge denied bail, citing Victor as a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. Luciana watched the news coverage from her new office, the one that had belonged to Victor, which she'd immediately redecorated to eliminate every trace of his presence. The anchor was breathless with excitement about the fall of one of Chicago's most notorious crime figures. "How does it feel?" Marco asked, standing in the doorway. "Strange," Luciana admitted. "I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated. But mostly I just feel tired." "That's because you've been running on adrenaline and revenge for 2 months," Marco said. "Now that it's over, now that you've won, the crash is inevitable." "It's not over," Luciana said. "Frank was right. The other families will test me. I'll need to prove myself strong enough to hold this position, ruthless enough to command respect." "You've already proven that," Marco assured her. "You took down Victor Blackwood without firing a shot. You outmaneuvered the FBI, secured counsel support, and claimed your father's legacy. That's more than most bosses achieve in a lifetime." Luciana turned away from the television, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city glittered beneath her, full of promise and threat in equal measure. This was her kingdom now, bought with betrayal and sacrifice and an iron will that had surprised even her. "My father used to say that the hardest part of taking power isn't the conquest," she said softly. "It's the aftermath. Living with what you had to do to get there, carrying the weight of the decisions that can't be undone." "Giuseppe was a wise man," Marco said, "but he was also wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "He thought the weight would crush you eventually, that the burden of leadership would break even the strongest person." Marco smiled. "But he didn't count on you being stronger than he ever was, more ruthless when necessary, more strategic in your approach. You're not going to be crushed by this, Luciana. You're going to build something that makes your father's empire look small by comparison." She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that the victory she'd won would lead to something better than just survival. But standing there in Victor's old office, wearing the crown she'd torn from his head, Luciana couldn't shake the feeling that she'd lost something essential in the process of winning everything else. Her humanity, perhaps. Or maybe just her innocence. The belief that love and loyalty could coexist with power and ambition. "Get some rest," Marco advised. "Tomorrow we start building the new regime, but tonight let yourself feel whatever you need to feel." After he left, Luciana remained at the window until the sky began to lighten with dawn. She thought about Victor, sitting in a federal holding cell, facing decades in prison for crimes she'd helped document. She thought about Isabella, raising Victor's son alone in Australia, probably never knowing how completely her lover had been destroyed. She thought about the empire she'd inherited and the price she'd paid to claim it. And she thought about her father, wondering if he would be proud of what she'd become or horrified by the ruthlessness she'd discovered in herself. The answer, she suspected, was both. Giuseppe Castellano had raised her to survive in a world that devoured the weak. He'd taught her to use every advantage, to show no mercy to those who betrayed trust, to value power above sentiment. She'd learned those lessons well, perhaps too well, but there was no going back now. No way to undo the choices she'd made or resurrect the woman she'd been before discovering Victor's betrayal. That Luciana, naive, trusting, willing to believe in happy endings, had died the moment she'd seen that photograph of her husband with another woman. What remained was something harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. What remained was a woman who would rule Chicago with intelligence and ruthlessness, who would build an empire that honored her father's memory while surpassing his achievements. What remained was the boss, and the boss had work to do. The first test came exactly 1 week after Victor's arrest, in the form of Michael Sorrentino walking into Luciana's office without an appointment. Sorrentino ran the Italian families on the South Side, a collection of old-world operations that had coexisted uneasily with the Blackwood organization for years. He was 68 years old, built like a bull, and had a reputation for crushing anyone he perceived as weak. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk without being invited. "Or should I call you boss now?" "Luciana is fine," she replied calmly, though her hand moved subtly toward the gun she now kept in her desk drawer. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit, Mr. Sorrentino?" "I'm here to discuss the future," he said, lighting a cigar despite the no-smoking sign on her wall. "See, your husband and I had certain understandings. Territories, profit splits, distribution rights. Now that he's indisposed, I'm wondering if those arrangements still stand." "They stand if they were approved by the council," Luciana said. "Were they?" Sorrentino's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Victor and I had a private arrangement, very beneficial for both parties." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Luciana said pleasantly. "As long as you can provide documentation of this arrangement, contracts, council approval, some record that it was legitimate, we'll honor it." "It wasn't the kind of thing we put in writing." "Then it wasn't the kind of thing that was actually authorized," Luciana replied, "which means it dies with Victor's authority. I'm sure you understand." Sorrentino leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "Little girl, I don't think you appreciate who you're talking to. I've been running these streets since before you were born. Your father knew better than to disrespect me, and you should learn the same lesson." Luciana met his gaze without flinching. "My father also knew better than to make unauthorized deals that bypassed council oversight. If you had a legitimate arrangement with Victor, prove it. If you can't, then we have nothing to discuss." "You're making a mistake," Sorrentino said, standing. "A woman playing at being boss, thinking she can just dismiss agreements because they weren't written down. The other families are watching, sweetheart. They're waiting to see if you're strong enough to hold what you've taken. Right now, you're not looking very strong." "Then let me be clear," Luciana said, standing as well. "Any arrangement made without council approval is void. Any attempt to pressure me into honoring Victor's private deals will be viewed as a challenge to the council's authority. And any family that wants to test whether I'm strong enough to hold my position is welcome to try. But they should understand that I didn't get here by being weak, Mr. Sorrentino. I got here by being smarter and more ruthless than the man I replaced." She pulled out her phone, showing him a photograph. It was Sorrentino meeting with Victor at a warehouse 6 months ago, money changing hands, no council representatives present. "I know about your private arrangement," Luciana continued. "Victor was giving you distribution rights in neutral territory in exchange for kickbacks that never made it to the organization's books. That's theft from the family, Mr. Sorrentino. The same kind of theft that got Victor arrested. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out of my office, forget about your private deals, and be grateful I'm not bringing this to the council as evidence of your complicity in Victor's crimes." Sorrentino's face had turned purple. "You threatening me?" "I'm educating you," Luciana said, "about the new reality of doing business in Chicago. The days of backroom deals and personal arrangements are over. Everything goes through proper channels now, with proper oversight and proper accountability. You can adapt to that reality, or you can find yourself in the cell next to Victor's. Your choice." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the desk. Luciana could feel her heart pounding, but kept her expression serene, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. This was the moment. Sorrentino would either back down or escalate, and his decision would set the tone for every other family watching this transition. Finally, Sorrentino stubbed out his cigar on her desk, leaving a burn mark on the expensive wood. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. Your father would be proud, or horrified. Maybe both." "Probably both," Luciana agreed. "Are we done here?" "For now," Sorrentino said. "But this conversation isn't over, little girl. Not by a long shot." He walked out, and Luciana waited until she heard the elevator doors close before collapsing into her chair. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding her system now that the immediate threat had passed. Marco appeared in the doorway moments later. "I heard Sorrentino was here. Everything okay?" "He tried to intimidate me into honoring Victor's private deals," Luciana said. "I told him no and showed him evidence of his complicity in Victor's schemes." "That's dangerous, Lucy. The Italian families don't take kindly to being threatened. I didn't threaten him. I educated him. She showed Marco the burn mark on her desk. But he made his point too. The other families are watching, waiting to see if I'm legitimate or just a temporary placeholder until someone stronger comes along. So what's your next move? Luciana stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. I'm going to give them something they can't ignore. A demonstration that I'm not just holding Victor's position, I'm improving it. Over the next 2 weeks, Luciana implemented a series of changes that rippled through the organization like earthquake tremors. She renegotiated the Irish treaty, securing even better terms than she'd originally proposed. She restructured the distribution network, eliminating redundancies and increasing efficiency by 20%. She reached out to families in New York and Miami, opening dialogues that had been closed during Victor's tenure. Most importantly, she established the Castellano Foundation, a legitimate nonprofit organization that provided job training and small business loans to struggling communities throughout Chicago. It was funded with money from the organization's operations, carefully laundered through layers of legitimate businesses, and it gave Luciana something Victor had never had: genuine community support. "This is brilliant," Marco said, reviewing the foundation's charter. "You're building political capital while creating a legitimate front for operations." "I'm doing what my father always wanted to do but never had time for," Luciana corrected. He understood that real power isn't just about fear and violence. It's about being essential to the community, so integrated into the fabric of society that removing you would cause more problems than tolerating you. "The council loves it," Marco reported. "Even Frank Moretti admitted it was smart strategy. But Lucy, there's something else we need to discuss." His tone made her look up from the paperwork she'd been reviewing. "What's wrong?" "Victor's attorney is trying to cut a deal with the prosecutors. He's offering testimony about the organization's operations in exchange for a reduced sentence." Luciana's blood ran cold. What kind of testimony? Everything he knows about council operations, family connections, financial structures. If the prosecutors accept his cooperation, he could expose the entire organization. "They won't accept it," Luciana said, but she heard the uncertainty in her own voice. "The evidence I provided was specific to Victor's personal crimes. He can't testify about council operations without implicating himself even further." "Unless he argues that he was acting under council orders," Marco said quietly. "That everything he did was authorized by the leadership, making him just a soldier following commands." "That's a lie." "It's a lie that could be very effective in court," Marco countered, "and it would destroy everything you've built. The council would never survive that kind of exposure." Luciana sat down slowly, her mind racing through options and implications. Victor was making one final move, one last attempt to hurt her by destroying the organization she'd claimed from him. Even from prison, facing decades of incarceration, he was still trying to win. "What does the council want to do?" she asked. Marco's expression was grim. "Frank and Tommy are pushing for a permanent solution, an accident in lockup, something that looks like prison violence. They say it's the only way to be sure Victor never testifies." "And the others?" "Waiting for you to decide. You're the boss now, Lucy. This is your call." Luciana closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Ordering Victor's death would be the practical choice, the safe option that protected the organization and everyone in it. It was what her father would have done without hesitation. But it was also a line she'd never crossed. All the strategies and manipulations, all the ruthless decisions she'd made, none of them had involved directly ordering someone's murder. This would be different. This would make her something she'd never been before. "Give me 24 hours, she said finally. "I need to think about this." That night, Luciana did something she hadn't done in months. She went to visit Victor. The federal holding facility was sterile and depressing, all concrete and fluorescent lights. Victor looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his expensive suits replaced with an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. When he was brought into the visiting room and saw her sitting there, his expression cycled through shock, hope, and finally resignation. "Lucy," he said, sitting down across from her with a thick pane of reinforced glass between them. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But I needed to hear it from you. Are you really going to testify against the organization?" Victor was silent for a long moment. My attorney thinks it's my only option. Without cooperation, I'm looking at 25 to 30 years. With testimony, maybe I can get that down to 10. You destroy everything. The council, the families, everyone who supported your rise to power, just to shave some time off your sentence? What do you want me to say? Victor's voice cracked. That I'm sorry? That I wish I could take it all back? I'm facing the rest of my life in prison, Lucy. Every decision I made, every choice that seemed right at the time, has led to this. I have nothing left except one final card to play. You have your life, Luciana said quietly. The council wants you dead, Victor. They want to make sure you never get the chance to testify. I'm the only thing standing between you and a prison yard accident. Then why are you here? To gloat? To watch me beg for mercy? I'm here because I need to understand something, Luciana said. When you put your hands on Isabella's pregnant belly, when you built that nursery and planned that future with her, did you ever actually love her? Or was she just another thing you wanted to possess? The question seemed to surprise Victor. He leaned back, considering it. I don't know, he finally admitted. I thought I loved her, the way she looked at me like I was someone important, someone worth admiring. It was different from how you looked at me. How did I look at you? Like an equal, Victor said. Like someone who saw through all my bullshit and demanded better. Isabella made me feel powerful. You made me feel accountable. And somewhere along the way, I started resenting that accountability. So you betrayed me. So I betrayed you, he agreed, and you destroyed me for it, which is exactly what I deserved, even if I didn't see it at the time. Luciana studied her husband through the glass, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. He wasn't the powerful crime boss she'd married, wasn't the confident leader who'd swept her off her feet and promised her the world. He was just a broken man who'd gambled everything on his own invincibility and lost. If I protect you, she said slowly, if I convince the council to let you serve your sentence without interference, you have to promise me something. Anything. No testimony. No cooperation with prosecutors. You take whatever sentence they give you, and you keep your mouth shut about the organization. You owe the families that much, Victor. You owe the people who supported you some measure of loyalty, even now. And in exchange? In exchange, you get to live, Luciana said simply. You serve your time, and when you get out, if you get out, you disappear. New city, new life, new identity. But you stay alive, and so does whatever's left of the honor you used to have. Victor's eyes were wet. Why would you do this, after everything I did to you? Because I'm not you, Luciana said. Because I don't want to become the kind of person who orders executions to solve problems. And because somewhere underneath all the betrayal and mistakes, you were someone I loved. That has to count for something, even if it's just letting you keep your life. The council won't like it. The council works for me now, Luciana said. They'll accept my decision because they know that showing mercy from a position of strength is more impressive than showing cruelty from fear. She stood, preparing to leave. Victor pressed his hand against the glass, and after a moment's hesitation, Luciana matched the gesture. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it. For Isabella, for the betrayal, for trying to destroy you. You deserved better than what I gave you. Yes, I did, Luciana agreed, but I took something better anyway. I took everything you had and made it mine. So maybe in the end, things worked out exactly as they were supposed to. She walked out of the holding facility and never looked back. The council meeting that followed was contentious. Frank Moretti argued passionately for Victor's elimination, citing the risk of testimony and the need to send a message about the consequences of betrayal. Tommy and Carmine were on the fence, seeing the practical arguments while also recognizing Luciana's authority. Silvio, surprisingly, sided with Luciana. She's right, he said when Frank paused for breath. Killing Victor makes us look desperate, like we're afraid of what he might say. But if he goes to prison, serves his time, and keeps his mouth shut, that shows strength. It shows that we're confident enough in our operations that one man's potential testimony doesn't scare us. It's not about fear, Frank argued. It's about eliminating threats. Victor's not a threat anymore, Luciana said calmly. He's a cautionary tale. Every associate, every captain, everyone in this organization will look at what happened to him and understand the consequences of betrayal. He lost his power, his freedom, his family. He's spending decades in prison while I sit in his chair. That's a more powerful message than a corpse in a prison yard. The vote was close, 4-3 in favor of Luciana's approach. Victor would be allowed to live, but with the understanding that any cooperation with prosecutors would result in consequences for family members he still cared about. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but prevented a fracture in the council. 2 weeks later, Victor Blackwood accepted a plea deal that involved no cooperation or testimony. 22 years in federal prison, eligible for parole after 17. His attorney told reporters that his client took full responsibility for his actions and wished to protect his family from further scandal. Luciana watched the news coverage from her office, Marco standing beside her. "You did the right thing," he said, "letting him live." "I did the strategic thing," Luciana corrected. "Whether it was right remains to be seen." "The council respects you more for it. Even Frank admitted you showed leadership by standing firm on a controversial decision." "Frank admitted that out loud?" Marco smiled. His exact words were, "The girl's got bigger balls than most of the men I know." "I think that's high praise from him." Luciana laughed, feeling some of the tension drain from her shoulders. "High praise indeed." Over the following months, Luciana solidified her position as boss in ways that went beyond strategy and intimidation. The Castellano Foundation expanded, opening 3 more community centers across the South Side. The Irish Treaty was finalized, opening new revenue streams that increased organizational profits by 15%. She negotiated peace agreements with families that had been feuding for decades, using diplomacy and creative problem-solving instead of violence. And slowly, grudgingly, the other families began to accept her authority. Not because she was Giuseppe Castellano's daughter, not because she'd outmaneuvered Victor Blackwood, but because she was genuinely effective at running the organization. Sorrentino was the last to come around, requesting a meeting 6 months after their confrontational first encounter. "I was wrong about you," he admitted without preamble. "When you first took over, I thought you'd be weak. Thought a woman couldn't command the respect necessary to hold power in our world. But you've proven me wrong." "I appreciate that, Mr. Sorrentino," Luciana said. "Does this mean you're ready to discuss legitimate business arrangements?" "It means I'm ready to acknowledge that you're the real thing," he said. "Your father would be proud, Mrs. Blackwood. Or should I say Boss Castellano?" "Luciana is still fine," she said. "And thank you. That means more than you know." After he left, Luciana sat alone in her office, looking at the family photograph on her desk. Her father, young and vital, standing beside her mother with his hand on young Luciana's shoulder. She'd kept the photo hidden for years, not wanting to seem sentimental or weak. Now she displayed it prominently, a reminder of where she'd come from and what she'd built. The burn mark from Sorrentino's cigar was still visible on her desk. She'd never had it repaired, keeping it as a reminder of that first test, that moment when she could have backed down or shown fear. Instead, she'd stood firm, and everything that followed had stemmed from that single decision. A year after taking power, Luciana received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her late 20s, holding a baby boy with Victor's distinctive blue eyes, stood in the reception area looking nervous and defiant in equal measure. Isabella Moretti had come home from Australia. "I know I shouldn't be here," Isabella said when Luciana agreed to see her. "And I'll leave if you want me to, but I needed you to know something." "What's that?" Luciana asked, studying the child who represented everything Victor had been willing to sacrifice. "Victor never loved me," Isabella said quietly. "I know that now. I was young and stupid and thought I could steal someone else's husband and live happily ever after. But even when he was with me, talking about our future, I could tell his heart wasn't in it. He loved the idea of me, the fantasy, the escape. But the real him? That belonged to you. And I think part of him hated you for that, for having the power to make him feel things he couldn't control." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I heard what you did," Isabella said. "How you destroyed him but let him live. How you could have had him killed in prison but chose mercy instead. That takes a strength I can't even imagine. And I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For my part in hurting you, for being stupid enough to believe his lies. For all of it." Luciana looked at the baby, Victor's son, the child he'd abandoned to keep his throne. "What's his name?" Michael, Isabella said. After my grandfather. He has Victor's eyes. I know, but he'll have my values, my integrity. I'll make sure he grows up to be better than his father. Isabella shifted the baby on her hip. I'm not here for money or help or anything like that. I just needed to say what I said. Now I'll go. Wait, Luciana said. She went to her desk, wrote out a check, and handed it to Isabella. For Michael. Put it in a trust fund. Use it for education, whatever you think is best. But every child deserves a fair start, regardless of their father's mistakes. Isabella stared at the check, $50,000, with tears in her eyes. I don't understand. Why would you help Victor's son? I'm not helping Victor's son, Luciana said gently. I'm helping a child who didn't ask to be born into this situation. There's a difference. After Isabella left, Marco appeared in the doorway. That was generous of you. It was strategic, Luciana said. Isabella will talk about this, about the mercy I showed her and her child. The story will spread. The powerful boss who could have destroyed her husband's mistress but chose compassion instead. It reinforces the image I'm building. You keep saying everything's strategic, Marco observed, but I think you're more compassionate than you want to admit. Compassion is a luxury I can't afford, Luciana said. I'm the boss now, Marco. Everything I do has to serve the organization's interests. And if those interests occasionally align with basic human decency, Luciana smiled, then I suppose I'll take what I can get. 2 years after taking power, Luciana received word that Victor had been transferred to a lower security facility for good behavior. 5 years in, he was granted his first parole hearing. 7 years in, against all expectations, he was released. She heard about it through her network, Victor walking out of prison, a changed man, thinner and grayer, wearing clothes that hung loose on his diminished frame. He disappeared into obscurity, reportedly moving to a small town in Montana where no one knew his name or his history. Luciana never tried to find him, never sent word or checked on his situation. That chapter of her life was closed, sealed shut by years of leadership and the distance that came with building something entirely her own. The empire she ruled bore little resemblance to the one Victor had controlled. Under Luciana's leadership, the organization became more sophisticated, more diversified, more integrated into the legitimate economy. The Castellano Foundation expanded into education and healthcare, becoming a genuine force for good in struggling communities. The criminal operations continued, but they were managed with precision and discretion, avoiding the kind of reckless expansion that had characterized Victor's tenure. The council grew to trust her judgment completely. Even Frank Moretti, who'd fought her appointment every step of the way, eventually became one of her strongest supporters. When he died at 79, his last words to Luciana were reported to be, "Your father would have been proud. I know I am." Silvio and Tommy remained her closest advisors, helping navigate the complex politics of Chicago's underworld while supporting her more ambitious initiatives. Carmine took over Frank's territories, managing them with the same efficiency and discretion Luciana had demonstrated. And Marco, her father's old consigliere, became Luciana's most trusted advisor. He was the one person who remembered Giuseppe Castellano clearly, who could tell her when she was living up to her father's legacy and when she was surpassing it. "You've built something remarkable here," Marco told her on the 10-year anniversary of her taking power. "Something your father never could have imagined." They were standing on the balcony of the penthouse, the one she'd shared with Victor, which she'd completely renovated until no trace of his presence remained. The Chicago skyline glittered beneath them, a kingdom she'd claimed through intelligence rather than violence, through strategy rather than fear. "Do you think he'd approve?" Luciana asked. "Of the foundation, the legitimate businesses, the way I've tried to balance the criminal enterprise with actual community benefit?" "Giuseppe was a product of his time," Marco said carefully. "He understood power in terms of control and dominance. You understand it in terms of influence and necessity. Different approaches, but I think he'd recognize the effectiveness of yours." "That's not an answer," Marco smiled. "Then let me be clear. Your father would be proud of your strength and your success, but he'd also be amazed by your restraint, your strategic thinking, your ability to build something that serves multiple purposes. You've taken what he started and made it into something better. That's the best legacy any parent could hope for." Luciana felt tears prick her eyes but didn't let them fall. Castellanos didn't cry, even now, even after everything she'd built and survived. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you've done for me, for my father, for this family." "The honor has been mine," Marco replied. "Giuseppe asked me to watch over you if anything happened to him. I don't think he imagined you'd end up watching over all of us." Later that night, alone in the penthouse that had been the site of so much betrayal and transformation, Luciana thought about the journey that had brought her here. The photograph of Victor's hands on Isabella's pregnant belly seemed like something from another lifetime, a catalyst that had set everything in motion but no longer held any emotional weight. She'd spent years building an empire, proving herself worthy of the throne she'd claimed, demonstrating that power didn't require cruelty and that strength could coexist with strategy. The organization thrived under her leadership, more profitable and more stable than it had ever been under Victor's control. But there were costs too. She'd never remarried, never allowed herself to be vulnerable enough to love someone the way she'd loved Victor. The betrayal had taught her that love and power were incompatible, that trusting someone completely meant giving them the ability to destroy you. So she remained alone, surrounded by advisors and associates and people who respected her authority but kept their distance. It was safer that way, cleaner. No one could betray her if she never gave them her heart. The penthouse phone rang, her private line, known only to council members and a handful of trusted associates. Luciana answered, expecting business. Instead, she heard a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Lucy? It's me." Victor, calling from wherever he'd disappeared to, reaching across the years of silence. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice colder than she'd intended. "I heard about the Foundation's latest expansion," he said, "about the new hospital wing you funded on the south side. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of what you've built, what you've become. I don't need your approval, Victor." "I know you don't. I just wanted you to hear it anyway." He paused. "I also wanted to apologize, really apologize, not the kind of sorry I said when I was trying to manipulate you. I destroyed something beautiful because I was too stupid and arrogant to appreciate what I had. You deserve better than what I gave you." Luciana closed her eyes, feeling emotions she'd thought were dead stir somewhere deep inside. "Why are you calling now, after all these years?" "Because I'm dying," Victor said simply. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, and I realized I couldn't die without making sure you knew that everything that happened, every terrible thing I did, it wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because I wasn't enough. Not for you, not for the position I held, not for the life we could have built together." "Victor, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "I don't deserve forgiveness or closure or whatever it is dying people usually ask for. I just needed you to know that watching you succeed, seeing what you've built from the ashes of what I destroyed, has been the only redemption I'll ever get. You took everything from me, Lucy, and you turned it into something better than I could have ever imagined." The line went quiet except for the sound of his breathing. Luciana stood in the darkness of her penthouse, holding the phone, feeling the weight of everything that had passed between them. "I hope you find peace," she finally said, "whatever that looks like for you." "I already have," Victor replied, "knowing that you're okay, that you won, that you became the leader I never could be. That's enough." He hung up, and Luciana stood there for a long time, holding the dead phone, feeling something crack open inside her chest. Not grief, exactly, and not love. Those emotions had died years ago. But perhaps a kind of closure, an acknowledgement that the man who destroyed her trust had, in doing so, freed her to become something greater than she'd ever imagined. She never heard from Victor again. When he died 4 months later, alone in a hospice in Montana, the news reached Luciana through the same network that had once tracked his every movement. She felt nothing when she heard it. No satisfaction, no sadness, just the neutral recognition that a chapter of her life had truly ended. The organization sent no flowers, no representatives to whatever small funeral was held. Victor Blackwood had ceased to exist in their world the moment he walked out of federal prison. His death changed nothing because he'd already been dead to them for years. But late that night, Luciana stood on her balcony and raised a glass of the expensive vodka Victor had always preferred. She didn't drink to his memory or his redemption. She drank to her own survival, to the strength she'd found in betrayal, to the empire she'd built from the ruins of a broken marriage. To power, she said quietly, to the Chicago skyline. And to the price we pay for it. 10 years became 15, then 20. Luciana's hair acquired silver threads that she wore without shame, marks of the wisdom and experience she'd accumulated. The council changed as older members retired or died, replaced by younger leaders who'd known no boss except her. They brought fresh perspectives and modern approaches, but they all understood the fundamental truth of Luciana's leadership. Success required intelligence, loyalty, and the willingness to adapt. The Castellano Foundation grew into one of Chicago's most influential nonprofit organizations, genuinely improving lives while providing the perfect cover for more lucrative operations. Luciana's name appeared in newspapers and charity galas, a respected businesswoman and philanthropist whose family history was politely ignored by those who benefited from her generosity. She never forgot where she'd come from or what she'd had to do to survive. The burn mark on her desk remained, a permanent reminder of Michael Sorrentino's test. The photograph of her father stayed on display, Giuseppe's eyes watching over every decision she made. And late at night, when the city was quiet and the weight of leadership pressed heaviest, Luciana would sometimes think about the woman she'd been before that photograph shattered her world. That naive girl who'd believed in love and loyalty, who'd trusted completely and paid the price for that trust. That woman was gone, destroyed as thoroughly as Victor's empire had been. What remained was something harder, colder, infinitely more powerful. What remained was a woman who'd taken the worst betrayal imaginable and transformed it into the greatest victory of her life. The empire stretched before her, built not on violence or fear, but on intelligence and strategic vision. It would outlast her, would continue long after she was gone, a legacy that honored her father's memory while surpassing anything he'd accomplished. Luciana Castellano stood alone at the top of Chicago's underworld, a queen who'd claimed her throne through pure force of will. She had no husband, no children, no family beyond the organization she'd built and the people who served it. But she had power, real power, earned through sacrifice and strategy, maintained through competence and vision. And in the end, after everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained, that power was enough. It had to be. Because 4 years of marriage, loyalty, and empire building had taught Luciana one final, inescapable truth. Love was a weapon that could destroy you if you weren't careful. But power, carefully cultivated, strategically deployed, ruthlessly maintained, power was something you could trust. Power would never betray you. Power would never choose someone else. Power would never make you feel like a fool for believing in promises. Victor had chosen power over love, and it had destroyed him. Luciana had chosen power over everything, and it had made her untouchable. The city glittered beneath her penthouse windows, a kingdom of glass and steel and blood that belonged to her now. Not through inheritance or marriage, but through conquest. The kind that left no bodies but destroyed lives just as completely. Somewhere in Montana, Victor Blackwood was buried in an unmarked grave, his name forgotten by everyone except the woman who'd orchestrated his downfall. And in Chicago, in the office that had once been his, Luciana Castellano ruled an empire that bore her family's name and her personal stamp of authority. She'd lost love, but gained a throne. She'd lost innocence, but gained wisdom. She'd lost the man she'd married, but found the leader she was always meant to become. And if the price of that transformation was loneliness, if the cost of power was isolation, then Luciana paid it gladly. Because she'd learned the most important lesson any woman in her position could learn. Better to rule alone than to serve beside someone who would betray you. Better to be feared and respected than loved and destroyed. Better to be the one who survived than the one who trusted. The story that began with a photograph and a choice, break down like a betrayed wife or strike back like the daughter of a crime dynasty, ended with Luciana standing victorious over everything Victor had once possessed. She'd chosen war, and she'd won so completely that even her enemy's final words were acknowledgement of her superiority. Chicago belonged to her now. The empire belonged to her. The future belonged to her. And Victor Blackwood, the man who'd thought he could have everything, who'd believed his power was permanent and his betrayals without consequence. Victor was just a cautionary tale she sometimes told new recruits about the price of arrogance and the danger of underestimating a Castellano. The war was over. The throne was secure. The legacy was assured. Luciana had won.